Hey everybody, and welcome to Bits of Board, where we're talking board games, miniatures, cards and dice. My name's Michael, and today we're checking out Great Western Trail, a Euro featuring a huge range of game mechanics all stitched together into one of the most unique games I've played. It contains elements of deck building, hand management, engine building, and it's even got a rondel style map chock full of actions. In Great Western Trail, players take on the role of cattle rustlers looking to make their fortune on the trails leading from Texas to Kansas City. Each trip provides opportunities to improve a player's herd and even the trail itself, but how much time a player dedicates to this improvement and not the actual forging of the trip, well, that's a problem left entirely to each player, which is essentially where the strategy of this game comes into play. Every time a player reaches their end goal, Kansas City, they perform a number of actions, placing tokens on the board, selling stock, and delivering along the train line, upgrading their player board. Once complete, they return to the start space, new cattle in hand, ready to make the trip again. As this cycle continues, the trail builds in intensity and complexity, bringing in more and more options and problems for players to figure out. And I'm telling you right now, this is the driving feature of the game that has had me coming back since its release. After a varying number of turns, depending on how quickly players make their trips, the game will come to an end and players will score based on money in hand, buildings placed, deliveries made, discs on train stations, hazard tiles removed, cattle purchased, objective cards met, station master tiles collected, workers placed, upgrades made, and finally whether the player has caused the end of the game. Guys, scoring is full on. Good news though, gameplay is deceptively simple. On their turn, a player will decide to which space they move their cattleman, use actions, and then, if you're below the hand limit, draw up. Done. Next player. Without any improvements, movement is up to 3 spaces, 1, 2, or 3, with spaces only counted if they contain a location. When paths branch, players choose which way they go, with all paths eventually leading to Kansas City. Now, obviously spending the maximum movement is the most efficient way to get to Kansas City, but this game is not one simply on movement, and players should make use of each location. Or maybe they can skip a few, and that is where the game goes from deceptively simple to a little crazy. See, during setup, the board is seeded with 7 different neutral spaces, and as the game progresses, players will have the opportunity to place their own. Now, let's not stray too far here and just cover the basics. Arguably, the most important actions available can be found on those neutral locations. We can sell cattle, buy workers, build private buildings, gain certificates, take objectives, move the engine, trade with the Indians, buy cattle, remove hazards from the board, and then there's auxiliary actions. Like scoring, there's a lot going on. Selling cattle gains money immediately, not at the end of the trip, and it allows players to discard low value or duplicate cards before they reach their end destination. And this is handy because at the end of their turn, players will draw back up to their max hand size. The other factor is players actually only sell their herd based on each unique cattle card they have on arrival in Kansas City, so having one of many is way more profitable. Buying workers, another action, makes certain actions easier. Cowboys make cattle cheaper to buy, craftsmen make buildings cheaper to build, and engineers make it easier for players to progress their engine along the track. And this is very important, especially for delivering cattle. See, should a player want to deliver to a stop that is actually further than their engine's position, they've got to pay based on the distance. Workers, when gained, are placed on a player's player board, and should they cover a bonus for the first time that game, that bonus is gained immediately. Not only that, players will gain victory points if they cover the last 2 spaces on each worker location. Building private buildings will allow players to score points at endgame and will unlock new locations for all players landing on that tile. Some locations also have tolls that other players have to pay you. Certificates allow a player to boost the value of cattle sold in Kansas City for the current trip only, and while it's only temporary, this action can save lives, I swear it, especially when it comes to delivering to those out of reach locations. Now, some of the actions allow players to gain cards, and when they do, they're going to place it in the discard pile of their draw deck. Objective cards gained will allow players to unlock new scoring opportunities if they choose to play the card and commit to the objective. Players will actually gain an immediate bonus for committing, but if they don't meet the requirements of the objective, they will actually lose points. Players can also gain cattle cards, which improve a player's deck, bringing in higher valued cattle to sell and extra victory points counted at endgame. Some actions allow players to move their engine, which will make it easier to sell to the farther cities, and can potentially unlock upgrades, including permanent certificates. Ooh. But it also allows players to upgrade their player board by placing discs just the same way as a player selling from Kansas. Trading with the Indians grants money and different coloured tokens useful for scoring objectives at endgame. Removing hazards from the trail grants victory points at endgame and improves some of the usability of the alternate routes along the trail. Finally, auxiliary actions make use of actions a player has unlocked on their player board. They're mostly just small bits and pieces, money, cycling cards in hand and awards, but they also tend to come in handy because these allow for the most flexibility in times of need. Now, there are other actions, and I'm not going to go through them all, but you'll find that these sort of expand upon some of the ideas we've already gone through. Things like bonus movement, cash grabs, or different ways to move the engine, and there's honestly heaps of combinations in the way that these actions are put together. In fact, each game played, players will have a pool of 10 different locations that they're able to place. And during setup, one of two sides is chosen. But the catch here, the beautiful catch here, guys and gals, is that these can be played in any combination. Yes, they're A and B side, but they can be mixed each game, so long as all players are playing with the same sides. Such replayability, guys. We have, I think, over 1,000 different setup combinations for players' private buildings alone. The neutral buildings too have a variable setup with the 7 different options placed in any of the 7 different locations. And actually expanding on that, on their first trip, players can choose to start the game on any of those 7 locations. Guys, look, there is just so much variation from game to game. You honestly never need to play the same game twice. Options you're presented with are always changing, and while your goal will always be the same, sell cattle, complete objectives, the way that you're going to be going about it will always be a surprise to you, which I find to be a really good thing. But for the action paralysis prone players out there, it can be pretty bad because there's always some new game-defining decision that you've got to make. For me, there are 3 points of AP death in Great Western Trail. The first is, where are you going to move? Players can gain up to a maximum of 5 to 7 movement points depending on the player count. That means if a player had only one direction to move through, they could have up to 7 different options to choose from. And that's just one possible path. In this game, the pathing can get crazy. The next is all about placement of buildings, which happens regularly enough. Here, a player will need to consider the actions they're making available, not just to themselves, but to their opponents as well. And positioning also plays a massive factor, as some paths taken may be less traveled later as others open up. This is especially true for when placing toll locations. The last point of AP for me is, what do I upgrade and when? Here, a player has to figure out which upgrade is going to be the most beneficial to them right now and in the future. And I'll tell you what, the future can be hard to predict. Great Western Trail is a fairly long game, so know that going in, you're going to need a few hours to play. It also requires a lot of critical thinking and problem solving, so it's not going to be a particularly light on the brain session. It is, however, an experience like no other around, and for all its complexities, it rewards with theme and player interaction. Look, I was an avid middleweight gamer when I first got into this, just poking my head into some of the harder stuff, and while I found the game to be pretty tough, it was still always a very enjoyable experience. And it's probably one of the main games that got me into the heavier scene. Production here is great, wooden tokens, thick board, decent enough cards, but there is a second edition coming soon which looks to change the whole vibe. The coolest part here though is that this second edition will actually eventuate into 3 different themes of the game. We'll still have Texas to Kansas coming first, but then in 2022 we're supposed to get Argentina, and then, assuming that's a success, in 2023 we're going to get New Zealand, which for me is going to be absolutely perfect, and honestly my point of upgrade. But don't feel you have to wait though. I imagine these first editions are going to start appearing like wildfire over the next couple of months. And while the cover's a little different and a little grey, the board certainly still pops. And the game, well, it kind of speaks for itself. Look, if you want to find out more about this game, the rulebook is up on BGG. It is a bit hectic, but it does wonders. As far as videos go, I don't have any recommendations off the cuff, so let us know who does it best for you in the comments down below, and help if you want to see me tackle how to play. Let me know. Yeah. Other than that though, guys and gals, hit that like button if you're enjoying these shorter reviews. Less editing honestly means more releases. And if you're excited to see more, make sure you smack that subscribe button. Other than that though, guys and gals, we are about done. So as always, my name's Michael. This is Bits Aboard. We'll catch you next time.